I think you kind of got to do your homework on the company, you've got to do your homework on the culture and the people that you're going to be working with. And then you've also got to look at yourself and say, well, what do I want? It's sort of like a constant surprise for us when we look back to the US and it's like, oh, what do you mean you sort of, that person, you found them a week ago? Like I interviewed someone and they're with us like 2 weeks later. Yeah. That's kind of insane. In the US right now, there's some really great loyalty programs for residents where you get points for paying rent. Now that's something that maybe isn't in Europe yet. So it's just quite interesting to kind of see.
Yeah, I'm excited. That's the first I've heard of that. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
right.
What are the kind of the top 3 challenges when it comes to onboarding a portfolio?
I think
Bella, welcome to the People Property Place podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. So we'll come on to Greystar a little bit later in terms of our conversation. But before we get there, a place that I always like to start is how and why did you get into real estate?
It's a question, I don't know, I kind of dread a little bit because I didn't have a grand plan of real estate. So I don't like to say it was an accident. But it certainly wasn't something I'd been thinking about since I was 10 years old. I think, I went to university, I guess through school, through uni, I'd always been focused on trying to find things that kept me interested. I knew that as a person, for me to kind of give my best, I need to care about it and I need to be, I need to kind of have a bit of adrenaline, but ultimately kind of find what I'm doing interesting. Being good at something or something being rewarding in other ways isn't enough. So I guess I got to the end of university and saw friends going into different careers and kind of nothing was really talking to me at that point. I made a decision when doing my finals not to apply for jobs when I was doing my finals. I sort of said, right, we'll think about that at a later date, kind of get through finals and then sort of see where we are. And so I guess, I kind of had my summer and that was fun. And then it was time to knuckle down. I think me and my brother both ended up back at home in the same year. He's older than me. And so it was kind of like, right, need to sort of show that we're moving on with our lives. And, I was temping and doing bits and pieces and just looking at what was out there. And I didn't really know anything about real estate. So as I say, it wasn't something that I was sort of had my eyes on. And it was more a bit of a process of elimination, which is to say, I sort of don't always love the question. But I knew, I was seeing friends going into law and going into accounting and, banking, management, consultancy, which are all obviously fantastic careers. But I sort of knew at that point, I didn't want to go back to school. I didn't want to do any more studying straight away. And I had this sort of need. My brother was looking at banking and I kind of had this need for something that I felt was a bit more tangible. And I actually signed up with a company, I think it was, I can't think of what it's called now, maybe Fresh Minds. It was a sort of graduate recruitment agency. And that, they had lots of different careers and it was, I guess, aimed at people like me who had the degree but didn't necessarily have a view of what they wanted then to do. And they had this job advertised with the Unite Group. And it was an executive assistant position, working in a part of the business, kind of trying to set up something new. And I don't know why, something about it just thought, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. It's about property. As I said, didn't particularly know what that meant, but I've been a big fan of things like changing rooms growing up. And so this idea of doing something tangible with the real estate and the built world around us, I guess I'd done geography at uni. So there was a bit of a tangential link there, should we say. So I saw this job and I decided to go for it because it just sort of sounded interesting. And I remember the assessment centre really vividly because it was at an airport hotel near Heathrow. And I drove there from my mum and dad's and it was the most horrendous weather. It was like a hailstorm getting there and back. And I did this assessment centre and I was the only external candidate for the role. So I sort of went through it, chatting to all the other candidates, thinking, I'm not going to get this. This isn't going to work. I don't know anything about the sector. I don't know the company. I don't know the team. So, this has been a really bad journey and quite a hard day that's not going to end up anywhere.
For an executive assistant? For
an executive. I guess it's an EA role, but it was this kind of setting up a new business, within Unite, this new kind of idea. So it was a sort of bit of everything type role. So I came away from it, probably got home, bit of a drowned rat getting into the house from the car and a bit dejected. And I think my parents thought, oh no, she was quite excited about this and it's not gone there. And then a couple of days later, I got the call saying I'd got the role. So that's kind of how I got into it. And as I say, I wish I had a story saying, oh, I'd love to be in real estate since I was 6. And it's just not that. But I think it ticked those boxes for me of being, tangible, something that you felt you could have a real impact on, and something that was a bit different. And there's probably something in that I found kind of interesting and sort of curious to kind of see what that could be.
What did your parents do or do?
So my dad was a sort of software electronic engineer, I guess working in defence, so project management and things around that. My mum had been a buyer when she left university, so worked with people like Boots and the Burton Group, and then had my brother and I, and went back to work in our school. So she'd sort of, I guess, put her career on pause, looking after us, which I think I'm forever grateful for.
So kind of no immediate real estate kind of connection.
No.
And then as a kind of a kid growing up, you missed out the fact you went to Oxford Uni to do geography. What kind of kid were you growing up?
Oh, I don't know. That's a big question. I feel like you need to ask my mum and dad. I guess I was probably a balance between, I worked hard, I was quite studious, but I think I can remember parents' evening and things, and my teachers always saying, well, yeah, Bella's working hard, but she's also a bit disruptive, or, she talks a bit too much, or she needs to focus and things like that. So I think I always enjoyed school. My diaries and planners and things always look very neat and lots of different colours. And, I got my homework done and I did well and knuckled down. But I think I also probably like to push the boundaries a little bit where I could. I think it's probably fair to say.
So you landed at Unite.
Yeah.
As an EA, you got the job as an EA.
Yeah.
What kind of project were you working on? And tell me about the kind of the team too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I consider myself very lucky. I was working for Joe Lister at Unite, who's obviously now CEO, was then CFO. And we were setting up this kind of, as I say, this sort of new idea. Unite was obviously very established in student accommodation. And I guess had this thesis of where do the students go after they've lived with us as students. And so we set up this kind of pilot project. We called it Levosity. So we kind of went through this whole branding process to really develop, what we would now call some form of BTR or young professional, or maybe early co-living, lots of different labels you could put on it, but really trying to develop a product for people when they left uni. And I was, in my role, just involved in all different parts of that. So we obviously worked with the Unite investment and development teams, marketing team, ops teams, everything. And we had this, I guess, kind of really fortunate situation where, we were doing something new, but we had the support and the kind of experience and knowledge of the Unite business. And so it was, sometimes that has its challenges when you're trying to kind of do things a bit differently. And we used to speak, you sort of had to go in the decompression chamber for people that worked on both, of saying, right, you have to kind of take your Unite hat off and put your Levosity hat on and think about, how we might do things a little bit differently and kind of build on that experience and that knowledge, but maybe approach things differently for a slightly different kind of resident customer base. So yeah, we developed 3 assets in London under that brand. And I guess, I was just super fortunate to be able to see all the different aspects of building out that brand and those assets and that business, and kind of, working on site with the development team on the actual physical product and what we were doing, working with our operations team on how we were going to actually deliver an experience for the residents. And then, thinking about, I guess, the business of it, what were we getting what we thought we would? Were we performing in the way that we thought we would? So it was super exciting, super varied. And then we hit the GFC. And so I guess we had to kind of take stock of whether it was the right time to keep trying to do new things versus really focus on the core business for Unite.
Did you love that role?
Yes, I did.
I can tell, because I guess it sounds like in one way it's quite scrappy and entrepreneurial, but it's backed by a big kind of business with a good, great balance sheet and a proven track record. But it's also like a small team that you can wear lots of different hats and get a tremendous amount of exposure and experience, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the thing. I think I was sort of very fortunate working sort of for Joe and with Joe at such a sort of early point in my career, and being able to learn from all these people within the Unite business that had that experience, but as you say, sort of be in this slightly more scrappy kind of entrepreneurial vibe. I mean, I remember one of my first days, in the first couple of weeks at Unite, we'd go down to the modular factory. And it was just like seeing the scale of, I guess, real estate, what it could be. So yes, we were part of this small thing that enabled me to have a huge amount of different experiences and I guess build lots of different knowledge and skill set. I also got a sense of the scale of real estate. That might sound a bit silly, but it was, you'd go to different cities and see these huge assets and sort of understand I forget the size of the portfolio at that point for Unite generally, but it was big, and you'd walk around Bristol and it's still mostly Unite at the time. So, it kind of, I guess you get a bit hooked then of, it sounds really silly, but as well, kind of with friends and family in London, we would go, like, oh, that's something I'm working on, or like, oh, that's one of ours. There's something
tangible about it.
Yeah, really tangible.
Which, if you weren't in real estate or brought up around real estate, you kind of wouldn't necessarily notice it, right? Or really try and understand it. So
that's the thing. I think my hook into real estate and my love of it had literally been, my mum and dad had always liked a renovation in a project house. So I think we moved when I was 7 or 8. And I'd seen that go on around me, but that was the extent of it. And I found that exciting and interesting, but short of kind of knocking down our kitchen lean-to with a mallet when I was coming home from school, I didn't have any idea of the scale of it. And the diversity of, I guess, different things that go on within real estate. And I think that's something that I'm really passionate now about is, real estate can be so many different things to different people in terms of career paths. And I just had no idea, when I was 21 or whatever coming into it, wasn't aware. It was like, okay, I know there's this thing called surveying. I know there's estate agents. I had no idea of the breadth of what the real estate industry is. And
in terms of that role then, I guess you got some phenomenal exposure to operations, asset management, investment, planning, design, etc. Did you know at that stage that it was kind of more of an asset and operational kind of driven stance that you wanted to take your career, or were you just a little bit, was that kind of too early to kind of really start leaning into that?
I think maybe a bit too early, I guess, as we kind of, I spent a couple of years at Unite as we built out those initial projects. And I think my sort of early leaning was probably more for that development side of it. I really enjoyed being on site. I really enjoyed seeing that the assets kind of come to reality and kind of taking something from an idea and a plan and what we thought might happen into then actually something that we were then launching. I think because we were a really small team, I guess I stayed really close to the operation, but I always said then, and I will say now, it is the most stressful part of it. When you're kind of at that hard end of people's homes and looking after people. And, I can remember none of my friends could really wrap their heads around it. We'd be sort of in our flat share on a Sunday night just settling down for TV, and I'd get a call because a fire alarm was going off or because there was a leak somewhere. And, I'd get myself together and go and try and sort it out because we were such a small team. And obviously that's not the same if you're in a big operation. But I think my leaning at that point was definitely more on that kind of product early development side. Because the operational side is full on and you don't have any control over it really.
You touched on kind of global financial crisis.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that time.
Do you know what? I shouldn't say it's funny. It's far from funny, but I think it's one of those things that when you're in something, and particularly at that early part of your career, you don't necessarily, you're just kind of getting on with it, right? You don't necessarily have an appreciation for the sort of the scale of what's going on. I can remember, we ultimately, as I say, we made the decision. I didn't make the decision. The decision was made that we weren't going to kind of continue with this pilot in that environment. And then it was about, do those assets become student assets? Is there another option? There ultimately was another option, which I'm sure we'll get to. But it felt really personal at the time because it was like impacting me and my career and my role. And I'd sort of invested a huge amount of kind of blood, sweat and tears into this. And it had been a really positive experience. So it felt really kind of, I don't know, it just felt a real shame that it was sort of coming to an end almost as it felt before we'd even got started. And, you were sort of aware in the news and of everything going on around you. But I think for me, it was just quite a personal thing of like, I've got to rethink. I kind of thought I'd made a decision and got into a role and this was going to sort of see me through. And I guess I came from a point of, my dad had worked for a couple of companies in my lifetime. So my view of a career and of the working world is that you sort of went somewhere and that was you and you worked hard and you did a good job and, you didn't sort of have to think about it more broadly as long as you kept doing a good job. So for me, the financial crisis was really this quite harsh awakening
to the reality of life and being
exactly.
grown up.
Okay. So I've got to make some big decisions. And the decision to take the Unite role was quite a straightforward one because it felt right in my gut. And suddenly I sort of had these other decisions of, did I want to sort of go down to Bristol and work in the Unite business, or did I want to sort of carry on doing what I was doing in London in some other form? And it was this kind of pretty harsh wake up to, this is real life now. And I've got to kind of make these decisions, look after myself and think about that.
You moved to go native?
Yes.
So is that the result of those kind of inward looking conversations?
Well, I guess it's kind of interesting, right? So we had the 3 assets. And at the time, native, we had native residents in our assets. So, corporate residents in our assets. So through, I guess, a nice set of circumstances, good set of circumstances for me at the time, we managed to talk to Native about the potential for taking on management agreements of those assets. And, I guess Native was faced with, hey, we're not going to continue with Livosity, so either these assets become student or we do something else. And I'm not sure exactly how it happened a while ago now, but Native essentially took on management agreements of the 3 assets that we had developed at under the Livosity brand at Unite. So myself and a couple of others had an opportunity to transfer over to Native sort of with those assets and kind of keep running them and think about, kind of building the Native business with Guy. So yeah, that was the next step.
So that's what you moved over to do. And you also, you did your master's in real estate, if I'm not mistaken, at Reading. Did that kind of just give you a bit more formal qualification or?
Yeah. And it's funny because I guess I know I sort of say when I left uni, I was like, no more studying. And then it didn't take me that long to go back to it. And I actually started that master's when I was at Unite and then finished it out when I was at Native. So moved over to Native with those assets, I guess. At that point, that's really where my career maybe more shifted into the asset management kind of part of things, I guess.
Stabilized assets and thinking about how do we manage, drive value, minimize voids? Or...
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, my role on joining Native was to really look after that portfolio, but also the broader portfolio that Go Native had at the time. So, we used to manage and have leases for a variety of, institutional and high net worth type property owners. So I kind of took on the asset management responsibility for that portfolio. So looking at how do we maximize this? How do we make sure that we're, delivering not just for us as a business, but for our owners. So that's what I did there. And kind of worked with Guy on, I guess, building out that portfolio. And I guess that was really a point within Native where we switched from more kind of individual units to thinking about blocks and thinking about, kind of whole buildings rather than, flats here and there, if that makes sense.
Would you say that's the start of the institutionalization of the residential market?
Oh gosh, that's quite a big question. I think it's really interesting when you think about the kind of institutionalization of the market because I guess it's changed so much. PBSA has maybe led the way in terms of becoming a more institutional asset class. Certainly when I started my career, it was still very much taught as alternatives. And I think, different groups still use the alternatives word or not now. So I think PBSA led the way. And then I guess sort of really through my 20s, lots of people were talking about, we then called it PRS, it then has become BTRs, few different terms out there. So I don't know what marks the start of it, but I think, you just sort of saw it start to build momentum kind of through that period coming out of the kind of global financial crisis. It went from being something that people talked about at conferences to something that was actually starting to happen. If that makes sense.
You were at Go Native for just under 5 years or so.
Yeah.
Kind of latterly as a portfolio development director.
Yeah.
So you got the asset management experience, then you moved back into more of a development or kind of.
Well, I guess it's in the way that role was at Native, we didn't develop our own product, but we were working with property owners, with landlords, so as I say, sort of high net worth institutional investors on bringing product forward for our business model. So I guess the portfolio development was really around growing our portfolio under management. And we did that through management agreements and leases. So, I maintained the asset management side of the existing stuff, and then also worked on finding new opportunities for us. That's what that was.
Tell me about the move to Greystar. Did you just get a call or bump into someone at a conference?
No, I did get a call. So I guess they were using recruiters at the time. They'd come into the market, I think, at the back end of 2013. I think probably anyone who's heard any of us talk about Greystar, it was one or two folks in a Starbucks, looking at the opportunity here. So then in 2014, I guess, had started to work with recruiters to kind of build out the team. So I did get a call, and it kind of, I guess, clicked into place a bit for me because, the time at Unite, the time at Native, it had always been in this entrepreneurial environment and kind of trying to build something. And as I mentioned, kind of through the early part of my career, there'd been a lot of talk about build to rent and the opportunity, and I guess people of my age that couldn't find somewhere good to live or weren't going to be getting on the housing ladder anytime soon. And there had been a lot of talk about this. So when Greystar came to the market, it felt like a really good fit for me because it was like, okay, these guys have done it. They've shown, they've sort of proven out, they've built the business model really in the US market. So if anyone's going to kind of have conviction around it and be able to build that conviction on the capital side as well, feels like these guys have got a pretty good chance. But it also had that element of being entrepreneurial and being new here. So I think, I clearly throughout my career have liked working in environments that are kind of growing and where you can have an impact and, kind of be part of that growth. So when Greystar, when the Greystar role came up, it just sort of felt like, yeah, okay, that feels like it would be a good idea.
What was the Greystar business 10, 11 years ago? And what was the kind of the founding part of the UK or European team as well, in terms of the opportunity as well?
Yeah, so I guess coming out of the global financial crisis, there was some dislocation, particularly in the student side of things, so in the PBSA side. So Greystar, with some existing capital partners kind of from the US business, identified that opportunity. And so with literally a couple of boots on the ground and kind of laptops in a Starbucks, found a couple of early opportunities. So acquired a few portfolios that were kind of coming out of that distress period. So that was really the first, I guess, kind of mark in the map really was on student.
So they've done a couple of deals.
Yeah, so when I joined the business, we had done 2 transactions. There was another one kind of in process as I joined. So I really came in to set up our asset management function. We were buying stuff. It was portfolios, as I say, things coming in quite thick and fast. So we needed to then make sure we were going to be able to deliver on the investment strategy. So that's what I came into. But it's really crazy when we go around we've just moved into a new sort of international headquarters office over in Moorgate in Finsbury Square, and thinking back to those early days when we had a couple of different serviced offices in City Point, I think it was, and we'd literally have to remember who had the key. So it's who was last leaving would need to be the first in to let everyone else in the office, and kind of agreeing whose music was allowed to be on. There was me and 3 others in this tiny little windowless room. So it's kind of crazy when you think where we are now
to where it started.
Yeah.
Were you Were you concerned about leaving Go Native and moving to kind of a US entrant coming over to the UK with grand aspirations and plans? And yes, they'd proven the model in North America, but for all intents and purposes, the taps could have turned off quite quickly. And there's kind of a risk around the unknown, as it were.
Yeah, it was a really, really big decision to leave. Definitely it wasn't a sort of an easy decision, but I think, as I say, kind of from a gut perspective, it felt like the right thing. And I think when I kind of did my research on Greystar and looked at the business, it didn't feel like this was a business that would kind of have an idea and then change its mind quickly, and that this is something that had sort of real conviction behind it. And I guess, when I met the team, I just got that real impression, right, that this is a group of people that had a lot of belief in the opportunity, and we're going to do everything they could to kind of make it work. Not sort of at the expense of an investment, but ultimately it's like
there was conviction.
There was real conviction around this, real clarity, and a business that had sort of successfully grown through different cycles. It wasn't a sort of a business that had only grown in the good times. It had grown through different cycles and found opportunity in that. So that felt really good. Yeah.
I'm just trying to draw parallels to maybe people who are going through similar motions at the moment, right? Because there's quite a lot of new groups that have come over to the UK or have got plans and aspirations to kind of set up. And, people will be going through those thought processes in terms of, do I leave a kind of a stable UK known brand to join kind of an international business that is maybe very well known back home, but has got aspirations to kind of take advantage of the opportunity set now in the UK and Europe, but is going through the kind of maybe similar thought processes that you had at that time, and what to look out for in terms of when they make their decision around should they go or should they not.
I think for me, I don't know how helpful this is, but I think, people should always try and find a company and environment that they think is going to bring out the best in them. And that doesn't always mean it's going to be a domestic company or an international company, but I think it's meeting people through a recruitment process, or, hearing people speak on panels and kind of getting to know businesses as we're all out there in the industry. I think you get a feel for sort of the type of company a different company is, how decisions are made, motivations for being in different places. And so for me, it's always been really important, I think, as I said at the outset, that I feel motivated, because if I'm not motivated by the work I'm doing, then I'm not going to bring the best sort of version of myself to work, and that's not going to work out for me. It's not going to work out for the company, right? So if I can give any kind of advice to people, it's less about the specifics of an international versus a domestic. I think you've got to understand, who are you going to be working with? What's the culture going to be in the office that you're going to work in? Do you value security and kind of predictability, or do you value high growth and change and kind of the different things that brings? I think, there is definitely different cultures working for a US parent company. I can remember in the early days, you had to get used to, like, oh no, we do take 2-week holidays in Europe. Like, that's something that we do. And I will hopefully be kind of offline for a fair part of it. Maybe not all of it, but a fair part of it. And, that sounds like a really silly thing, but it's just like this different, it's just a different kind of mindset, different culture, right?
Like, what, you get 25 days holiday allowance? Like, that's crazy. And your notice period is 3 months. You can't start in 2 weeks' time.
The recruitment thing was kind of insane, actually. And I think even now it's still like a constant surprise for us when we look back to the US, and it's like, oh, what do you mean you sort of, that person, you found them a week ago? Like, I interviewed someone and they're with us like 2 weeks later. Yeah. That's kind of insane. And similarly, sort of equal and opposite over this side. So I think it's just, it's kind of understanding the motivation. If it's a sort of, I guess, a capital back strategy, you want to kind of understand, is the capital there? Is this something where there's, I guess when I joined Greystar, we'd bought portfolios, even if nothing further had happened, we had, I think it was about 7,000 units under control at the time. So like that's a pretty sizable portfolio.
And there's a fee stream there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like I knew coming into that even if the rest of the growth was slower to come, we had a sizable portfolio and a fee stream, and I should be able to kind of build my role there for a period. So I think it's kind of being knowledgeable and aware of those things. And I think also as an individual, you have to understand at different points in your life what your appetite for risk is in your career. Because the risk you take when you're 25 might be quite different to a risk that you're prepared to take when you're 35 or 40 and you've got dependents or whatever else might be going on in your life. So, or the flexibility that you want from a career might be quite different at different points for different reasons. So I think you kind of got to do your homework on the company. You've got to do your homework on the culture and the people that you're going to be working with. And then you've also got to look at yourself and say, well, what do I want? Because some people want the kind of crazy and the change and the growth and not knowing kind of 1 week to the next. And some people don't. And both of those are absolutely fine. And I think you've got to kind of try and remove peer pressure or family pressure or just like a view of what your career needs to be from those decisions and say like, what's going to feel good for me? Maybe it's cliche, but you've got to listen to your gut based on being well informed at the same time.
I think it's a really valid point, and I think you're absolutely spot on. Like crazy, intense, long hours, like could suit me right now, but am I going to want that in 8 years' time? Yeah. I don't know. I might want the stability, and actually, you can want both of those environments at different times in your career, right?
Exactly.
And you can kind of fluctuate within that. Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. You were kind of brought in, one of the first 10 people into the UK, Europe. A couple of kind of portfolios were bought, fee streams in place, with a mandate, with a remit to go and build out the asset management and operational function.
Asset management at that time, yeah. Yeah, so we, that was my role, kind of really building out the asset management function.
What does that actually mean?
It's a good question, right?
Is that like...
You're going to ask me that.
Is that like tech, who's our property managers, systems, processes? Like what does it actually entail?
Yeah, so I guess what it entails now versus what it entailed then is probably quite different. At the time, I think when there's not a huge number of people, the core role from an asset management perspective is to maximize the value of the investments, right? So we've got a plan, we're making sure that we're either delivering to that plan, or if the environment around us is changing, that we're responding to that and maximizing value kind of in the prevailing environment. So that's kind of the simple way to think about it. I know asset management can mean loads of different things in different companies, but that was my role. What we spent a lot of time in those early years is like data and reporting and systems. Like I had no idea going into, my role at Greystar, how much of my time I would then spend on the kind of the infrastructure, the plumbing, the how we kind of enable ourselves to deliver on our investments by having the right platform around us. But that's such a key part of it, right? You can't do your job, as an asset manager, investment manager, whatever you want to call it, if you don't know what's going on at the property level. So, in these early years, it is like, what systems are we using? How are we getting information out of them? Is that the right information? Are our teams communicating with each other at the right points so that we're making good decisions in a timely way? Are we communicating with our capital partners? So, a lot of time spent with our capital partners, making sure that we're aligned, on what's going on with the portfolios, where we should be looking for growth, if there's any risks that we need to be mindful of. So it's kind of a bit of everything. And in a startup environment, even within a big business like Greystar, that bit of everything can go in all kinds of directions, kind of setting up and launching the chapter brand on kind of the UK student side, really involved in that. Yes, we obviously had marketing team and resources that led on that, but everyone's working together in a business when it's that size to get to the kind of desired outcome.
Yeah, I guess the worst thing that a capital partner wants to hear is, sorry, we just got indigestion and we're not going to be able to kind of take on that next asset or that next portfolio because we just haven't built the capacity or systems or processes to be able to do that. How much of your time was spent over in the US looking and learning about what they do and kind of modeling best practice and bringing it back over here?
A decent amount, I guess. If you looked at it on percentage times, not loads. We used to go to the US relatively regularly, spend time with our kind of counterpart colleagues, but also on site in our properties with our property management colleagues, with our development colleagues. So it was all different kind of parts of the process that we would spend time with. I think one of the really interesting things in the early years is sort of finding that equilibrium or that balance in terms of what you can import from the US versus what has to be kind of more localized to a particular operating market. Because I think, there can be a kind of, I guess you can fall into a trap maybe of saying, well, we've done it here, so we can just cut and paste that. But if you've got a different supply chain, or if you can't find the people to fulfill those roles in a different labor market, all of those kind of things, then that's not necessary. You can't just cut and paste. So I think a lot of, the kind of build out of the platform really has been understanding and then, being able to deliver a consistent Greystar experience, but maybe in a slightly different way or with slightly different building blocks in different markets. What we want to always be really consistent is the experience for our investment clients, the experience for our partners, the experience for our residents. We want our residents to know that if you're living in a Greystar building, it might look and feel different, whether it's student, whether it's multi, whether it's, in Paris, in Spain, here in London. But there's got to be a kind of consistency of what you can expect in terms of the customer service, in terms of that experience. So it's kind of, how do we do that when we're in a different operating environment?
Taking into consideration policy, cultural nuances,
language, is a big one for us in Europe. System availability. I think I remember one of my early US visits. I went to our headquarters in Charleston and sat with the kind of portfolio and asset management teams there, and they showed me all their asset management systems. I was like, oh, my job's going to be really easy. Like I just get to use all these tools. But obviously those tools rely on, a system being able to plug in and have the same data and those things. And system environments are different market to market. So, it's understanding how you plug in different operating environments to that kind of central way of doing things, if that makes sense. So that regardless of the product type or the location, we can kind of ultimately consider things in a pretty consistent way.
Did that come naturally to you, or was that kind of a big kind of challenge to get your head around, trying to orchestrate and kind of pull all these wider pieces together?
I don't really know how to answer that question, I guess.
Clearly it did come naturally to you because you're still here and you've risen up the ranks rapidly. But, it must have been a challenge, right? But you must have loved that, and you must have leaned into it, right? And seized the opportunity and enjoyed the challenge of trying to pull off a project of this size and scale, right?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? It's not easy. But we had great colleagues around us and, sounding boards in the US. And, I think that's the sort of real privileged position to be able to build a business and build a platform with the benefit of that knowledge and that experience and that scale in the US. We had this track record. I guess when I joined, it was a 20-year track record. It's now a 30-year track record. So I think, we used to do these sort of investment team offsites once a year. We still do them, but we used to kind of get everyone into one place, whereas now the business has grown, that they're maybe done in different pockets. But I remember one of the first ones I went to, and we were really in the thick of it with onboarding some of our first portfolios and everything that goes with that. And we went round the room there must have been, 30 or 40 of us in the room. And we were going around the room saying, introducing ourselves because we didn't all know each other. And then saying what our big challenges had been that year. And I was kind of sat there thinking, well, the US is this, stable, sort of steady as she goes. Everyone knows exactly what they need to do and what they're doing. And I'm going to be the only one that's coming to this without necessarily that sort of stability sitting underneath it. And it was really, I guess, encouraging at that point because everyone around that room in all the regions of the US, as well as those of us from Europe, was growing their business pretty exponentially. So although we had these different challenges because we were doing it maybe in a new market or without the sort of depth of the platform behind us, the guys in the Southwest region, they'd also bought a big portfolio and were onboarding that, and people in another region had brought on a different product type. So I kind of got this, I guess, understanding kind of relatively early in my time at Greystar that this was a business that this is kind of what we did. We grew, we saw opportunities, and we kind of took them. And so that was, I guess, both reassuring and exciting, if that's the way to put it, because you weren't alone.
It's okay to feel imposter syndrome-y, or actually, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this, but that's kind of part of the wider culture.
You also knew that you could pick up the phone and there would be someone else who was maybe not doing the same thing as you, but they were doing something similar, or they'd done it the year before. So, it's like, we're just transitioning this new student portfolio in and we're bringing 150 team members with it. When did you last do this? How did you approach that? Have you got any materials that you use to kind of communicate about the Greystar kind of business and way of doing things? So it kind of sounds silly little things, but it was just that realization that, okay, this is a kind of friendly space and this is what we do. So yeah.
That probably leads us in quite nicely to the next part of the conversation, because it started with a UK portfolio. The business now has got a huge global footprint, but European footprint as well. And I think just under 20 billion US under management, or is it kind of 17?
Yeah, so it's 17.5 euro.
So
under management, so there's always
just a small portfolio, but a significant number of beds. Can you just talk to me about the evolution of the UK and European Greystar platform and maybe how your role evolved as well?
Yeah, of course. So I guess we obviously started with a couple of student portfolios here in the UK. I think a year or so later, we put boots on the ground, or we had our first portfolios in the Netherlands. So again, that started actually with a student acquisition, quite a different type of product, but a student acquisition over in the Netherlands. And then I always struggle with exactly the order, but I guess over the pursuing years, we did a big student acquisition in Spain. So again, that was a big kind of student platform. So we very quickly became quite large in Spain. And then kind of continued organic growth in the Netherlands, put boots on the ground in France, Germany, Austria, and Ireland. So, kind of gets us to our 7 markets where we are today. And I guess at the same time as, I've mentioned the word student quite a lot, we were building our multifamily platform and kind of pipeline in the markets where at the time it made sense to do so from a kind of returns, relative kind of returns perspective. So, people always say, Greystar is obviously huge in multifamily in the US and student, but multifamilies, I guess the large part of the portfolio. Is there a reason why it's been more student focused for Greystar in Europe? And it's really opportunity and product, I guess, because as we probably all know, there isn't a big institutional market of BTR in Europe. So really, while the student portfolios are there in trading, and there's been a great opportunity on those strategies, we've been building out our multifamily pipeline, but that's been more ground up. It's been more development. It takes a bit longer.
You've had to build the market rather than just buy the market.
Exactly. So that's been a big part of what we're doing. And you kind of start to see the unit numbers start to maybe not balance 50-50, but kind of balance out a little bit. So. That's been super exciting to see, I guess, in terms of my career and my role in that. As I said, I joined the platform to set up our asset management function. within the first, I think, year or two, I took on responsibility for our capital projects and marketing functions as well. So capital projects is delivering all our renovations. Marketing hopefully does what it says in the tin. And then I guess and I get really hazy at this point, kind of because of COVID and then having maternity leave during COVID, like my year tracking just goes really skewed. But I think about 5 years ago, I kind of had the role that I have now across Europe, across the UK. So leading what we call asset execution, which is a slightly odd sounding term, but it's essentially looking after all of our assets once they're up and running. Me and my team obviously are involved throughout the investment life cycle, but asset execution encompasses our property management platform, our marketing platform, kind of health and safety, sustainability, data and analytics, as well as our kind of core asset management platform as well. So, and I feel like I've probably forgotten something because I always do. But, it's really, once we've got residents living with us,
the day-to-day,
the assets that are up and running, that's the responsibility of me and my teams to kind of deliver and really, deliver that great customer experience that ultimately drives the return for our partners and our clients. So yeah, that kind of, I guess I grew into that role in the UK business, and then about 5 years ago took that role, took over that position for the European business. I guess, we'd developed our European business at a market level, and then we were looking to kind of, I guess, be more consolidated, be more consistent across the region.
As in take the kind of the learnings from the UK, or just, being mindful of like the nuances or what the benefits on the ground in Spain or the Netherlands, and actually feed that back in to create a continuous improvement loop.
Yeah, I think it is being mindful, but it's not just best practices from one place out. I think that's one of the great things about the business and our platforms around the globe, is that you can always be kind of improving and learning something in a different market. And so, yes, I guess as a European platform, we had a desire, to make sure that we weren't learning things twice. And that we weren't duplicating effort in different places. So I guess when you looked at our European platform, it just made sense to have that as a European business rather than separate businesses. But then for us globally, I think that's just one of the really kind of exciting and interesting things. We obviously learn things from the US and we share knowledge and things, but there's also things that we've been able to trial within the European markets because they're a bit smaller, a bit more agile, that maybe we can kind of show works, and then that can be transported back. So it's definitely a sort of two-way thing. And technologies develop at different speeds in different places as well. So that's really interesting to see. I think, in the US right now, there's some really great loyalty programs for residents. Now, we don't necessarily have the scale in the European markets. There's things like credit cards. You think about your usual points credit card. There's things that you can do where you get points for paying rent. Now, that's something that maybe isn't in Europe yet because of just the different scale of the market. So it's just quite interesting to kind of see the different opportunities and how they can be applied in different places.
Yeah, I'm excited. That's the first I've heard of that. I'm excited to see how that develops.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Talk to you about in-house versus external operating partner.
Well, I guess I'm biased, right?
Of course.
I guess that's one of the things that I think is really unique and really exciting for team members about Greystar is because we are sort of everything under one roof. We're investment manager, we're developer.
Vertically integrated.
I'm trying not to use the term.
What are you trying to say instead? What's the new?
No, I think it's just vertically integrated is one of those things that means a lot to those of us that are kind of in it. But it's one of those terms that, like, if I said it to my mum, she'd just go,
what does that mean?
Okay, sounds nice.
Real estate jargon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like trying to talk in terminology that means something to people outside of the industry. And I think most importantly means something to people that might be at school or at uni and thinking about their next steps, right? Of, we don't want real estate to be this kind of opaque thing that people don't understand and think that you have to know something to get into. So that, maybe making more than I should have.
No, it's one of the key drivers for wanting to do this podcast is to try and break down some of the jargon and the stigmas or the barriers, or kind of open it up to enable people, regardless of their walk of life, be able to find or identify with a home within a particular kind of strand within the kind of the property space. But anyway, I digress.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry. So we do have all of the different, pillars within the Greystar business. And I think what that enables us to do is really understand the drivers kind of through a cycle and, really connect what's going on at the asset level with what, your investment strategies and what's making sense. As I say, different strategies make sense at different points through a cycle. So by having the management team sit alongside our investment and development team members, I think that feedback loop is just that bit quicker and it's just more integrated.
And you can be more confident around the data.
Yeah.
And you can own that as well, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Competitive advantage, or be able to make better informed decisions based on being able to look at the whole life cycle.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And, if you look at, I guess, the Greystar platform globally, we've got, I think it's close to 900,000 apartments under management now. I
think it's 996,000.
Yeah, 100,000.
Just shy of a million. Oh, sorry. Yeah. But just shy of a million, basically.
Yeah. So, there's a huge amount of residents and a huge amount of data and really rich data that we have on our residents. So I think it's just, it's that feedback loop and being able to pull the right people into a conversation kind of when you need to have that conversation. And
that's more challenging, kind of managing external managers in country on the ground.
I think it's just a different approach. I think, our investment managers are really close to the real estate, because we're an integrated business, right? So, I think it just brings you closer to the real estate. It brings you closer to your residents, being able to kind of have that under one roof. But look, we have a huge third-party management business in the US. You have a growing third-party platform here in Europe, and I just think by Greystar being all three, it makes us a better manager for our investment clients, and it makes us a better manager for our third-party clients as well.
When it comes to asset management operations and kind of asset execution, are there particular nuances between BTR, PBSA, co-living, and other kind of living verticals? Like nuances, and are they vast or are they kind of, from an operational and asset execution perspective, pretty similar?
There are definitely nuances. I think whether you call them vast or not, I think you can trip yourself up if you think that because you can do one, you can do the other. Sort of no questions asked. I think there's a lot of transferable skill set and a lot of transferable process and kind of approach across, but it's not cookie cutter. I guess it's the same thing about going into different markets, right? If you're going into a different product type, you've got to understand who are your residents going to be? How do you reach them? How do you talk to them? What are the channels that they're using that they're going to kind of come to your product along? What experience are they looking for when they live with you? Do they want a more tech-driven experience or a more people-driven experience? What is the product that's going to kind of appeal to them? So I think a lot of the kind of foundational stuff, is very similar. If you think about asset management, it's like understanding what your business plan is for that asset, making sure that you are executing on that, making sure that you've got the data coming back to know whether or not you're executing on it, to know where your areas of opportunity are versus maybe where you've got some risks and how you need to manage those. So there's a lot that in terms of, I guess, that process and that kind of foundation is really similar. But you've got to be really thoughtful about where the differences are. And I think that's probably one of those things of, what are your leasing channels? What's the experience that you're providing on site? What's really important to those groups? And even within multi, that can look quite different, whether you're delivering, a kind of zone 1, zone 2 London versus a zone 5, zone 6 or something, you know, it's kind of like, who's actually going to live here? Is it going to be people that are going to live there for a year or so because it's a more transient neighborhood? Or is it people that want to set down roots for a number of years? So even sort of within a product, you know, I think you've got to be thinking about ultimately who's going to live here.
Yeah. And making sure that it's product market fit.
Yeah. How do we deliver for them? Because that's what's going to ultimately make us deliver for our partners.
There's a number of portfolios in the market for sale. What are the top 3 challenges when it comes to onboarding a portfolio?
Top 3 challenges. I think the data and the systems transition, like, is probably one of them.
Just making sure that they talk to each other.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, I guess on very rare occasions, you're buying a portfolio that's on the same platform that you're on. So that's quite nice, because then you've got a team that know how to use that platform, and the data should be relatively similar. But more often than not, you know, you're transitioning from one platform to another. And so that always is, you know, it's not an insurmountable challenge. People obviously do it every day of the week, but it just takes quite a lot of coordination. It's quite a big focus of teams when they're mobilizing, because it touches everyone, right? It touches your team in terms of if you assume that there are people that work on those assets that are also going to stay working on those assets, they've got to get used to a new way of doing things on a new system. You've got to actually make sure that the data is accurate coming from one system to another, because you don't want someone saying they've paid their rent and they haven't, or vice versa. Probably more likely vice versa, hopefully. And then, yeah, you know, for your teams kind of corporately, you've got to make sure that everything gets set up in the right way. So it's just, there's quite a lot that goes into that, let's say. Trying to think, you said top 3.
There's probably 3 within that one, right?
Yeah, there's quite a lot. I think the other thing is, you know, it's teams and people, right? Because I think for whenever we're transitioning a portfolio, that you've got people coming with that, you know, more often than not, these types of transactions are corporate rather than asset. And, you know, within most of Europe, you've got kind of 2P type legislation. So that's a really unsettling time for for people and people working on site or working in corporate teams. So making sure that you're communicating really clearly with the team, that they understand, you know, what's changing, what's staying the same, what the opportunity is, trying to get people on board quickly. There's always, I think, a bit of a, I don't know whether it's a tension, but I guess an interplay between wanting to kind of keep things steady, but also, you know, wanting to kind of get people in a sort of, you know, if we're onboarding something into a Greystar way of doing things sooner rather than later. So that's always just a bit of a balance of, you know, almost how much change can people take at a point. So I think that, you know, the people side, and then from a resident perspective as well, because this is someone's home, right? And I think as maybe more so on the student side, but, you know, probably increasingly so on the multi side as well, people are buying into you know, they're choosing to live somewhere. Yes, maybe because it's the right location and it's the right price point and it's, you know, got the right type of flat. But they might also be buying into the community and buying into the operator as well. So sort of being thoughtful about how you communicate to your resident base too.
As we kind of draw the conversation towards a close, what are you most excited about right now?
That's a really good question. I guess we've been doing a fair amount of reflecting. You know, we're 10 years in. It's like, what's the next 10 years going to hold? I think I'm really excited about the platform that we've built at Greystar across the 7 markets that we're in, across different product types. I think the constant for me in my journey so far has been that there's going to be growth. I kind of feel pretty confident that there will be growth. So I guess if I sit here and look forward, I'm super excited knowing that we've got this super foundation. You know, we've got teams on the ground in all of our markets across, you know, property management, development, investment. So I think we're in a really good position to just kind of capitalize on the opportunities that present themselves. And I think the thing that makes it kind of sounds a bit cheesy maybe, but the thing that makes me most excited about that is knowing that the growth that will deliver for our team members that have kind of joined the business recently, maybe been in the business a couple of years, and just sort of really being able to watch that and kind of see that growth come forward, and just the opportunity that will deliver. I think maybe kind of getting a bit more specific, we've invested a huge amount in our data platform as Greystar over the last couple of years. And I'm really excited at how that will kind of empower our teams and kind of continue to kind of supercharge their capabilities. And I also think, the technology world is changing, and it's changing fast. I never pretend to be a tech specialist. But I think it's exciting, right? Because it sort of helps you solve those challenges of how do we, bring our product to a wider audience? How do we, enable our teams to kind of have more fulfilling jobs and careers because they're focused on the areas that they really add value. So I think the kind of technology side will kind of supercharge those areas. We also recently launched a strategy in the Netherlands around kind of mid-market housing. We've got a similar strategy in the US as well. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity just to, again, use that platform that we've built to deliver the product to maybe a slightly broader market as well. So yeah, there's kind of lots of different things, but I think really it's just like, where's the next 10 years of growth going to take us, and what's that going to mean for our team? I think that's really exciting.
You just come back from a sabbatical.
Yes. Talk
to me about that.
So sabbaticals were introduced as a new benefit, I think 2 years ago now. So for any team members that have been with the business for 10 years, and then basically every 5 years thereafter, we get a sabbatical, which is fantastic. So we get 6 weeks off. And I guess, for those of us fortunate enough to have been around long enough to be kind of qualifying for them over the last couple of years, we've been really focused on trying to use them and take them, and I guess kind of demonstrate that it's a really great benefit.
Because there's one thing kind of having it in your policy. There's another thing around cultural utilising it. And
I think that's been really important. It's been great to see people all over the business take it and really benefit from it. And Wes Fuller, our CIO, he had his, and kind of seeing what different people have done with it, I guess. So my daughter started school this September. So it was a kind of summer before she started school. So took an opportunity to have a slightly extended holiday with her. So we spent a few weeks in Italy, which was fantastic. And then actually just spent a few weeks at home, which people always say, what do you do with your sabbatical? And you feel like you should be saying, I kind of went on this 6-week trip, or I went really far afield. But I think we still haven't plucked up the courage with a 4-year-old to do long haul. So, eating lots of gelato in Italy was a great choice for our family. And then, just having some time to spend with her and kind of enjoy just being at home. I think a couple of things I took away from it. We always, in modern life, you go away and you come straight back into work, right? And into, whatever that looks like for you in your kind of life. And it was really luxurious going away and then coming back and not going straight back into work. So I think that's actually almost made me rethink a little bit, because I was always, particularly before we had my daughter Fleur, I was always that person that would like do a red eye into the office to like maximize the holiday time and still, kind of be in the office when I needed to be. And it's just kind of made me go, maybe there's a different way of doing things. Maybe we don't have to cram so much in. And actually there's a real value and a real benefit from just being able to kind of slow the pace a little bit. So I think that was good for me and our family. I think there's been people that have literally done just that. They've just said, no, I just want to be at home, and I don't get to do that as much as maybe we would all like to. So that's been really valuable. And then there have been the people that have gone to Japan and Tokyo and Thailand and all different things for the period. And so I think it's a great benefit, and one that now I've done it once, I'm like, right, what do I do in 5 years' time? I've sort of got a bit of a feel for it now, right?
Or maybe when you're talking to your US colleagues, to your point you made earlier in the conversation, when they're like, what, you're going to take a 2-week holiday? And you're like, the first week is going to be in Italy, the second week will be at home, rather than cramming 2 weeks in away.
Exactly.
Well, look, Bella, you've had a phenomenal career, and I get the sense that you feel like you're just getting started as well, having achieved so much. As we do draw to a close, a question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast as a kind of a finishing tradition is, if I gave you £500 million worth of capital, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to allocate that capital?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this, and I was like, there's almost what you can do with your professional hat on and then what you do if it was like in your next life. So I'm going to go with the slightly more professional. I think, with that much capital, I do think there's a huge amount of opportunity. I'm obviously hugely biased, but I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in European living sector real estate. I think one of the things that we often get asked is, what's the top pick? What's the one thing? I think the great thing, if you were to give me 500 million, is you could do a few different things. So I guess UK student for me is where it kind of started, and I'd do a bit of that. I think, we're starting to see real opportunity in Germany now. That market was sort of, I guess, from a pricing perspective, not that attractive, whereas that's kind of becoming more attractive now. So I think there's a real opportunity there. I think one of the things that also really excites me about Germany is there's a lot of rental stock in Germany, right? It's maybe a bit different to the UK in terms of its percentage of sort of institutional rental, but it's quite an older vintage product. So I think you always get that question of, is this product going to work there? So I think there's a part of it, there's a challenge there. So I'd do something in Germany, and then goodness, I've probably got let's have a diversified portfolio. So let's go to a couple of other places. I think, the Netherlands is good. It's kind of performed really well for us. Everyone always talks about the rent-controlled environment, but actually it's an environment that if you're delivering good kind of modern vintage product that's environmentally friendly, it performs really well. So I'd probably do a bit in the Netherlands. You can also do a bit more kind of flexible. You don't have to pick student or multi necessarily. That's probably kind of getting to
maxing out your budget,
I reckon. So that's the property and the places. I think the people, I've been fortunate to work with the most fantastic team kind of through my career. And so I don't know if we're supposed to pick specifics, but
you can. I would love it if you could. Most people avoid it.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to have to go with the most people and avoid. But I think probably if we're talking about people, one of the things I would call out is, at Greystar, in my role, I've had the fortune to work with loads of different teams. Lots of different teams kind of come under my group, but kind of more generally. And I think the people that don't get enough focus is actually our on-site team members. And we have had some really, really fantastic community managers that have worked with us and then have progressed through to, ROMs and various different positions within our organisation, staying within operations or moving into other functions. So I'd probably just give them a bit of a shout out of saying, I do think, it's the key to your resident experience and everything that kind of builds from that is having really fantastic people on site who really care. And we've had some brilliant community managers. So I'd probably pick a few of them to kind of open up these new assets in my European portfolio.
Well, Bella, entering into the real estate space almost by accident, kind of getting into a car and driving through the rain to go and interview for an EA role awful. That you thought you kind of butchered, to leading the charge for one of the biggest European players is absolutely incredible, and I've been really inspired by your journey, and I know that the listeners will as well. So thank you so much for being so open and honest.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.